Thanks so much for having us. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but just give you an overview of what's happening from a transportation perspective in Northwest Denver. So my name is Geneva Hooten. I'm the city project manager for this particular project, and I have several of my colleagues on the line with me as well to answer questions if those come up. So I'm going to go really quickly through this. We have been talking to the public since let's see, our open house got canceled. It was right at the beginning of COVID. So then we came back in April. So we're really at the beginning stages of this whole project, and it's building on a number of citywide plans, and really most namely the two citywide bike plans, Denver Moves from 2011 and the 2015 update. And I'll come back to this slide. And what we're trying to do is always increase safety. Our number one goal is to get to Vision Zero, meaning no serious fatalities or injuries by the year 2030. We're trying to provide new options for people to get around that are safe and convenient and accessible. We want to rapidly deliver high comfort bikeways throughout the city. And we are just trying to give more options for people to move in different ways. So this is a network that those yellow lines are showing the funded projects. And so I'm really going to be focusing here within the boundaries of Sloan's Lake Citizens Group for this evening. And I'm going to walk through each of these projects pretty quickly, and then I can always come back if there are any questions that come up. So the first one is Byron Place in Vrain. And what you see highlighted are the current closed streets, or open streets, however you want to call them, with the city. But Byron here and then Vrain are also part of the citywide bike network. And we posed it to the public over the past 6 weeks saying, we have two options. We can do bike lanes or a neighborhood bikeway. And for those who are a little less familiar with those two types, a bike lane, we would actually be able to add in a buffer, and that would provide space between cars and people biking. A neighborhood bikeway has a shared area, but it retains on-street parking, and we would add traffic calming elements. So it's really similar to what you see on West 35th Avenue. And interestingly, more people said that they would prefer a bike lane. And in terms of when we asked how people are getting to Sloan's Lake, they're saying that they're walking and biking the most, and then driving as well. And this is interesting information for us because we know that the trade-offs between these two things, if we end up going with a bike lane, it will mean parking removals, but we also know that that has an opportunity to provide a more dedicated space. And we still have a conversation to have with the Parks Department on this one because of a potential opportunity to keep this section of Byron Place closed through the park, part of a longer term conversation, and it's going to impact our designs. I'm going to walk through a couple more, and then if folks have questions, you are welcome to ask. So West 23rd Avenue is a good connection from Sloan's Lake to the future protected bike lane on 23rd. This orange line here is a neighborhood bikeway. So what you'll see there is really no changes to the street. On-street parking will remain. The speeds and volumes that we have there in that particular section are low enough not to require anything in addition. And then when we get to Quitman, what we found was that the street really widens. And because of that widening, we wouldn't be able to properly deflect vehicles and slow them down. So those numbers at the top are saying that the most common speed that cars are going is 28 miles per hour, and we have over 1,700 cars a day. So if we were to keep this as a neighborhood bikeway, we would also need to do things like add diversion and really change how people are using the street. And so instead we opted to add in bike lanes. And that opportunity, we know that there are some folks who are not in support of that, but overall we have a overwhelming support of continuing with this as bike lanes rather than a neighborhood bikeway. And we've gotten a lot of questions about parking impacts. And one of the things that our team has done is we were really intentional about where we would be removing parking. And it's only because of the width of the street, we'd have to have that trade-off And so we opted to remove it on one side instead of both sides of the street. And here is the parking data that we collected. The 5 a.m. count, you may be saying, why 5 o'clock in the morning? And that is our most standard time to collect residential parking times. It's the time when we can expect most people to be either cozily in bed or drinking really early morning coffee. And it's about the same as what we would get at, say, 3 o'clock in the morning, but we don't have to ask people to do that. So these numbers are showing that we have a lot of parking available, not to say that there won't be impacts, but this isn't as parked out as many other places that we have across the city. Okay, I'm going to keep going, and I'm sure there are questions. This is a diagram that just is showing what that parking removal would look like. Of all of the parking, 61 spaces would be removed, but we still have, that number looks wrong to me. Of the portion between Putman and Lowell, it's about a 50% parking removal.
Yeah, Geneva, this is Chris Vogelsang. So that's 385 spaces left within a block of 23rd. On 23rd itself, it's 61 removed and 61 remaining. That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Just to clarify. Yep.
Thanks. Okay. So the other street that I'm going to talk about is Julian. And in the Denver Moves recommendation, it actually had Irving. And Irving is a collector based on our street classifications. It's very narrow. There's parking restricted on one side anyway. We looked at the speeds, we looked at the volumes. We wouldn't even really be able to add in a bike lane because of how narrow everything is. And so to make it a comfortable bike way, we would have had to add multiple diversions, lots of things that would actually just restrict some of that key north-south connection. So instead we looked at Julian, and this is a low stress, low volume street. Certainly the connection at 26 needs some looking at, but we posed this to the public and said, look, we think that this is a better street. What's your take on this? And I should clarify, a neighborhood bikeway retains the on-street parking. We're adding more traffic calming elements to slow down cars. And this is showing that we have a lot of support for this. It's nearly at 50%. We do have some folks here, and that's the blue bar, that are saying, no, I don't support that. And the reason we think that's happening is because a lot of the comments are saying Irving needs some attention and it needs some safety mitigations and some improvements. We don't want to forego those potential improvements if we choose Julian. So when we're looking at this, we think it's Julian and additional traffic calming and multimodal elements for Irving to continue to increase safety along that particular street. Okay, and the last one that I'm going to talk about is Perry. This map is kind of goofy. We have it going like this, but we know it's a north-south street. And Perry is another neighborhood bikeway. And the way that you can think about this is it's going to be a more comfortable street if you are walking or biking, if you are with your family. If you are driving, you will still be able to drive through parts of it. But ultimately, we're trying to make it a better street with additional traffic calming. And I've pulled out some images of what that might look like speed humps and additional all-way stops. And we have quite a lot of agreement of particular intersections. And you can see here, this image on the left is showing that the cross section of what that street will look like does not change significantly, except for at locations like at intersections and a few mid-block locations where we do have additional traffic calming. So hopefully that is satisfactory. And I will go quickly through this and leave time for questions. So we are still listening to the public, holding small group meetings like this evening, continuing to hear that input. We got tons and tons and tons of good survey data for the surveys that were up for over 6 weeks. And so we're going through those hundreds and hundreds of comments, making modifications to the designs. In September, we will come back and say, this is what we're planning to do. Here are the tweaks that we've made. And then we'll hand that off to the design team for them to take it to 60 and 100%. And then these will start to be implemented over the next few years. And we have several ways to stay involved. I should have added the project hotline to this. We do have a number where you can call, leave a message. Someone from the project team will call you back. We're finding that to be a really good way to make sure that we're really understanding folks' concerns and having human conversations about projects like we would in, say, an open house in normal times, instead of having back and forth with emails, which tends to not be as quite as fruitful. However, if you would like to send an email, we're happy to read that and we'll get back to you. Our next public meeting will be September 23rd from 5:30 to 6:30. You can access it right there on that website. And if you email us or email me directly, we're happy to get back to you. So I've just been talking for a long time, probably too much information. I'm going to pause and just see if there are any questions that myself or my team can answer.
Geneva, we had, thank you so much, first of all. That was great. Thanks for sharing that with everyone in the neighborhood. We had one question from David Shen. He was curious about the shared street on Stewart and the open street on Lakeshore, and wondered if that would be included in the discussion about making Byron permanent as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, David. So I think I'm understanding that, and you're talking about at the very eastern side of, like, through the park, right?
And I don't know how I'm going to get groceries.
That's right. Yes, he said yes.
Okay.
On the chat here. Yep.
Okay, thanks. So that is a good question. It's one that we're not specifically looking at, but I think it can be part of our conversation with parks. One of the things that we are really trying to be intentional about is with 23rd to make sure that the connections into the park make sense, and the connections to Byron make sense. So, and additionally, if someone is coming, say, from Edgewater on 26 and they're dropping down on Vrain, that connection is also really logical. So I don't have a specific answer for you about that particular section of the open street, but do know that we're looking at these projects collectively and as a network and not just as individual projects, even though we continue to talk about them as individual projects.
Great, thanks, Geneva. It looks like Garrett Rogers is also mentioned on chat that he has some questions as well. Garrett, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, all. Just to start off, my name is Garrett, of course, third generation in the neighborhood. Just have a few questions, mostly relating to the slide showing the parking, if that's possible to go back to what streets are maintaining on-street parking and which are losing. I know there was that dotted line graphic, just to go back to that. Honestly, to begin, I'm just a little confused. Geneva, I know we've emailed back and forth a few times. And just to understand clearly, this red dotted line in between Newton and Osceola, just that one side is restricted, no longer parking, correct?
That's correct.
All right, I'm just curious of what the reason is for that street specifically, considering the rest. Given the fact that I'm not sure if many of you know, this block particularly houses a decent amount of senior citizens. Many that couldn't actually even come to the meetings, they weren't sure how to get here. I'm just a little concerned about losing their on-street parking and just why that block in particular is losing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Garrett, it's a good question. And that block is unique because of that small group of commercial businesses at that corner of Osceola and 23rd. And so we were trying to retain that parking for those small businesses, understanding that there will, of course, be trade-offs. We're exploring some options of potentially shifting the bike lane, and there might be a way that we can keep some of the parking on the north side there for part of the block and flip where the impacts are. But that's a little bit of a funky design and we still need to work that out. Mm-hmm. So that's really the reason behind it. To the other point about some elderly and disabled residents, we have been hearing a lot from neighbors along 23rd. And when anyone has those concerns, we've been sharing information about how to apply for an accessible parking permit with anyone who's asking. We want to make sure that if someone really genuinely has a physical handicap and needs that we're not prohibiting them from accessing that.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. It's great to hear. I've talked to the neighbors. I've heard that almost all of them have actually applied for that parking. I also just
Can
want to
you
know
hear
if you've taken into consideration that many of the people that shop at those businesses park on this side of the block due to that there's like 2, maybe 3 spots for cars on that other side in front of those businesses because it is restricted parking as well. I'm just wondering if that's been taken into account in that decision for that plan as well.
Yeah, it is.
All right. And not to take all the time, just one more question. I was just wondering if there was any kind of study done on the amount of U-turns that takes place on Osceola and 23rd. Personally living here for my entire life, it's every day. I'm just wondering if that's been taken into account for the safety of bicycles. If that street is no longer as wide and now there's no longer any parking on this side of the street, cars are just gonna be flipping around to park in front of the businesses. I could just see that as a problem for bicycle traffic as well.
Okay. Just say that one more time. So you're concerned about bike safety on
Yeah.
Osceola?
Yes, there is a significant amount of U-turns that take place, like on 23rd and Osceola. Cars flip a U-turn, a 180 right there in that block. I'm just concerned with that being a less wide street. People will not be able to park on this side anymore and are going to flip around to park in front of the businesses. I get to see that being like a possible threat to bicycle traffic, to pedestrian traffic, to vehicles. My father did a survey. He counted 18 in a single hour of U-turns to get to those businesses. So I just feel like that's something to be addressed as well.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Of course.
Oh, Alan, you are muted.
Thank you. We had a question from John as well. Thanks for your question, Garrett. Will Perry get sidewalks where they are missing?
Good question. I'm actually going to call on my colleague Paige to answer that one.
Yeah, and the question is, what about sidewalks on Perry that are missing?
I believe, John, you can pipe in if you'd like.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
He does not.
I'm hearing some background noise.
I'll mute myself.
Thank you. Yeah, so sidewalks are actually addressed through a different program we have at the city. And sidewalk construction is quite expensive. It costs $1 million per mile to build a new concrete sidewalk and gutter, which in transportation terms is a lot of money. And so right now the sidewalk program is focusing on building sidewalks on what we call our high injury network, where we have lots of people who have died or have been seriously injured on that particular street. So streets like Colfax, Federal are on our high injury network. So right now, building out sidewalks on that network. And then we also have another program building out sidewalks adjacent to bus stops. So those are the city priorities right now. And that came from our Denver Moves Pedestrians and Trails plans, which was a big planning effort, involved lots of the public to understand what priorities were for building sidewalks. So I will definitely check, but I'm pretty sure sidewalks on Perry are a lesser priority on the city's list right now, but we'll definitely take that into consideration moving forward with pedestrian issues on the street. And I just want to say that improving the bike or adding a neighborhood bikeway on the streets really will improve things for pedestrians. And I know it's not the same as having a sidewalk, but it will be safer even if people have to walk in the street or adjacent to maybe a missing sidewalk or a sidewalk that's not wide enough.
Thanks, Paige. We had a question from Nicole. She's curious about how Doty is reaching out to our residents that might not have access to technology that can't participate in a meeting like this.
Yeah, it's a good question. We've been using this technology called BroadNet, and our first open house, and then we had actually 2 open houses in June, and one of them was using BroadNet as well. And so that is a way that people can call in to the meeting if they know about it. So I know that that can be a challenge, but we're also making direct calls out to people who have landlines. And so that if someone picks up at that particular time, they are automatically joined into the meeting and can listen in, even if they don't have a computer. And for the June meeting, we held that across a really large section of the city. It included this network, the central network, and the south central network. We had almost 650 participants for that. We've also, with the help of Councilwoman Sandoval's office, had flyers created by their office and flyered 2 weekends ago, semi-losing track of time, a few weeks ago. And in addition, we have the project hotline. I'm always happy to talk through things with people who maybe aren't able to go online or aren't as savvy in accessing some of that information. We know that it's different and hard to share information with people, especially in the days of the pandemic where we can't do pop-up events and have an open house in the same way. So we're trying really hard, lots of creative ways to do that. Always open to suggestions if you have some. We want to make sure that we're listening to everyone.
Thanks so much. Tom, how many more time, do we have time for another question on this topic?
I have a question that probably somebody else might have also. For the implementation of this, is there funding available now or do we have to wait?
Good question, Tom. So my answer is going to be multifaceted. So one, do we have funding for it all? Absolutely not. We have funding for some of the multimodal elements that will come, and we will be talking to you about those later. Short-term pedestrian improvements, stop sign changes, all of that. Maybe a little bit with existing programs. For the bikeways themselves, of those yellow lines that you're seeing, those are funded as of today. But we also know that city funding is variable. Some of these we have an opportunity to leverage paving projects like Tejon, 46th, 50th, and others will be additional funding on top of that. I will also say that Perry and 41st are part of the Elevate Bond project. And so those were approved by Denver voters in 2017 and are 100% funded.
Thanks, Geneva. We had another question from Ryan. This was about the intersection at Tennyson and 26 on the north side of Sloan's Park and concerns about it being a hot spot for drivers hitting pedestrians there, accessing and getting into the park as well.
Yep, it's definitely on our radar when we're going into some of those multimodal prioritizations. That particular intersection right here is, I think, what you're talking about, has come up for us a number of times, and we know that there isn't a sidewalk connection into the park right there. Definitely known, addressed, and we'll work on figuring out some improvements for that.
Great. We've got a bunch of other questions on chat here. I know we're limited on time for the agenda to get through everything today. Geneva, what is the best way for people that are on this phone call to continue the conversation with you all for those questions? Again, if you don't mind repeating for folks that might join late.
No problem. Yep, you can email me and the team at denvermoves@denvergov.org. It's helpful if you put something like Northwest or the street that you're talking about in the subject line, just because a few other people access that inbox, and we will get back to you. And if someone else from the project team wouldn't mind adding the hotline number to the chat panel as well, people can feel free to call that hotline.
And I'll say it out loud for those of the folks that are just on the phone and not able. If you could write this down, the chat phone number is 303-223-6575. Paige had put it in there as well.
Right. Thanks, everyone. And I think the very last thing is, if you are not already on our mailing list, we have a huge email inform list, and we're trying to share information through that. If you're not on that list and you want to be, please email us at this address, and we'll make sure that you're added to that as well.
And Geneva, I'm sorry, Geneva, one more thing. We had one more concern from Ruben. He might not have heard the part about the accessibility parking pass that you mentioned. Some older parents with some accessibility issues. Could you remind folks of that again real quick?
Yes, definitely. And Ruben, I think we've actually spoken on the phone. The city has an accessible parking permit program. There are a few stipulations for that. I don't know them off the back of my hand perfectly, so I'm not going to mess them up right here. If you're interested in learning more about how to do that, if you call that hotline, we can provide that number for you. And maybe Al and I can just stay on the line and provide that in the chat after I close my screen. And people can ask those questions directly to our accessible parking permit folks.
Great. Thank you so much, Geneva. Tom, is there anything else that you'd like to ask of the Doty team?
I would just like to thank Geneva for her wonderful presentation, and we look forward to having you keep us posted on upcoming progress on this project.
Anytime. Thank you all so much for listening, and have a great rest of your evening.
Great. Thank you. As a person that bikes with their kids to preschool every day, I echo that. Thank you so much for making our streets safer.